So I wanted to really thank the Congresswoman for joining us today because unlike a lot of elected officials that I've dealt with in the past, she is, and this is a real, she's flexible. There aren't that many who are that flexible, all right? Because at first we were going to do it one time, then another time, and she had to move and adjust her schedule more than once. And even as of this morning, we changed the time, and that was really my error, right? Because you guys have activity hours the hour after this, so I thought it was then, not now. But anyway, we got it all straightened out, okay? And so people are coming, and I know that there are some people who hoped that they would get here today, but I think they're going to show up after. So I'm going to have to hang around and tell them sorry. But this is what the Congresswoman said. So what I generally do when we have guests at these series is I ask the guest to introduce him or herself. Simply because when you read somebody's bio, it's a lot of stuff, and you pick out the things that you think are most important. But you don't really know, unless you've been in their shoes, what's most important to them. So I'm going to ask the Congresswoman to take just a few minutes, introduce herself to you, but ask her also to make sure that she tells us about all the elected positions you've held, because I know there have been a variety of them, and you've served the people of the constituents in your districts, of which are tri-borough right now. She represents people in Manhattan, Queens, and in Brooklyn. And she represents St. Francis. Yes. So give her a warm welcome and thank her for being here.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a treat to be here, so I want to thank Assemblywoman, former, but she's still my Assemblywoman, continues to be, because in so many ways she nurtured another special lady who now is occupying her elected position as an Assembly member. And Joan Millman always struck me as someone who really cared deeply about the issues important for her constituents. Well, my name is Nydia Velasquez. I've been in Congress for 23 years.
Anybody here older than 23? Yes, of course.
So my first job was a college professor at the University of Puerto Rico. I was the youngest director of the social science department of any department. I was 22 years old. I came to New York University. I worked on my master, and then I went back. But I came here to study when I was 19, and with a full scholarship from the government of Puerto Rico. It means that government played a role in helping me achieve my dreams and my aspirations. So deeply important to me is the role of education and the role that government should play and must play in providing the resources that will enable young people to fulfill and realize their full potential. So I came to New York and worked on my master, went to Puerto Rico, taught at the university. 5 years later, I came to New York and I taught at Hunter College. And then the governor of Puerto Rico approached me and asked me if I wanted to be the director of the offices of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. And I said to him, I'll do it with one condition, and that is I put together an agenda of what I think that office role should be in helping the Puerto Rican community in New York and across the nation. And so I said to him, we do need social services. This was almost 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And even though we had a huge Puerto Rican population, they were invisible. Invisible when it comes to the school, invisible in terms of housing and so many other issues that Puerto Ricans were facing here. So I told the governor, I put together this agenda. If you support this agenda, then I will accept the position. So my first item in the agenda was to empower the Puerto Rican community electorally in New York City. Because I felt that even though we had the numbers, we were invisible. And the only way that we can bring about positive change for our communities is by exercising your right to vote and demanding change, demanding positive change. So that I put together a voter registration campaign known as Atrévete there too. And we registered in New York 250,000 Puerto Ricans. The rest is history. We increased, not only did we register huge numbers, but we educated them. And I used everything that I thought could be helpful in empowering the community. Most important, educating them, helping the community to connect the dots. If we need change, how can we get the attention of the elected officials? How can we get the attention of the executive, whether it was the mayor or the governor? And so we increased the number of electoral participation, the percentage, from 26 to 52, and this is in 1989, when David Dinkins, first African American, got elected mayor. So 5 years later, after dealing with the voter registration campaign, reapportionment, every 10 years we take the census. The census show the increase or decrease of population, and based on that, congressional districts are drawn. By then, in 1990, the Puerto Rican community, the Latino community, fought to create a congressional district. A congressional district was created to increase Latino representation. Well, I taught at Hunter College, and when I was teaching at Hunter College, I was teaching American politics. And when I was teaching, I remember students telling me, "Why don't you run for office?" And I said, "Me? To run for office?" It was just like so foreign, that idea. I didn't think maybe that being a teacher qualifies me to run for office. And then I was here only for a few years. Yes, I knew the theory, I knew the facts, I could teach about American politics, but from there to run for office, it never crossed my mind. But when they said it, it became attractive to me. But I let it just sat there in the back of my mind, and I went on to work for the government of Puerto Rico, the voter registration, the congressional district that was created, and then the community activists approached me and asked me, "You should run for office and for this congressional seat." And I say, it will take a lot of money. How could I put together everything that it takes to have a campaign? This is a congressional district. It's a big district. It's not an assembly. It's not a city council district. It's a congressional district. Back then, 500,000 people. Today, it's 850,000 that I represent. So I then was drawn into running, and I worked in putting together a institutional support. And we reached out to the unions, and there was a union here, 1199, who became very key, and the president of the union helped me because he was a Puerto Rican president of the SEIU in New York, Dennis Rivera, played a key role. But then I moved to broaden a base beyond the Puerto Rican Latino community with the Asian community, progressive whites, women. I understood that there were two natural bases for me: the Puerto Rican community, Latino community, and women. And so we reached out, we put together this amazing campaign, and all of a sudden, it was a congressional district, it was an open seat. It was supposed to be an open seat. But all of a sudden, a sitting member of Congress, because he felt threatened with the district that he will have to run in against another incumbent, decided to run in my district, in that open seat. So then, all of a sudden, from being an open seat, it became an incumbent running in that congressional district. And so we were all scared, We thought that an 18-year incumbent with $4 million in his war chest, and we were facing a split vote in the sense that there were 5 Latinos running for the same seat. So common sense tells you that the Latino vote is going to split, 5 Latinos running, and the incumbent with 18 years of incumbency and $4 million, that would be an easy thing for him to win, an easy ride. And we didn't have much money. We didn't have the money to be able to compete. I was a newcomer. I was a new face. How could I introduce myself into the new voters? So the new voters, what did I have to do? I owned an apartment, and I took a loan against my apartment and put all the money into my campaign, $140,000, and the rest is history. I defeated one of the most powerful members of Congress at that time, 23 years ago. So, but before that, I served in the city council for a very short period of time when an incumbent in 1984, 85, was indicted and convicted. I was working for a congressman at Towns who maneuvered to get the city council to appoint me to fill the vacancy. But then a sitting assembly person ran against me. And at that time, when I lost my first campaign, I didn't have the money, the name recognition. And it was Geraldine Ferraro who sent me this beautiful letter, the first female in the history to run as vice president, and encouraged me. And she said, Nydia, you won, and please don't give up. And so 5 years later, there I was running for Congress and winning that seat. So the most important aspect for any, let me just say, look, this is the challenge that women have in this country. We comprise not only half of the population, but we represent half of the U.S. workforce. And let me connect the U.S. economy so that you can realize how important it is to give an opportunity for more women to have a seat at the table where decisions are made. We bring a unique perspective into any legislative process. It is not a coincidence nor an accident that when we were working on the most important piece of legislation that we have passed in recent years, the Affordable Care Act, right? That provided insurance to 20 million people who didn't have any type of insurance. Well, prior to that law, insurance companies were discriminating against women for the sole reason of being a woman. That was considered a pre-existing condition. So no longer those type of no longer being a woman should be used and is prohibited by law. So you don't have to pay more. Your premium, it should not be more expensive. It is not an accident that in the law we included that children could be and will be covered until age 26. And that didn't exist before. So who brought those elements into the whole debate when we were discussing or drafting the Affordable Care Act? The women from the Congressional Women Caucus. We push for those elements. I just wonder whether or not a bill like that, a law like that, will have those type of provisions if women were not sitting at the table. When I was elected the first time, in 1992, there were 45 women who were elected into Congress. And
that's in both houses?
In both houses. out of 535 members. So I told you that women, we comprise half of the population, that we comprise half of the private wealth in the United States, that women also make the spending decisions for almost 3/4 of U.S. households. Without women's contributions, our economy will be 25% smaller today, an amount equal to the GDP of New York, California, and Illinois. Can you imagine? Without women, without the role that women play in the U.S. workforce, without the role, the increasing important role that women are playing in terms of business formation. Today, we own, women business owners, they own 17 million businesses. And 90% of those are small businesses. So you can imagine if women were not, and by the way, the business formation among women doubled in the last 10 years. So the more women becomes entrepreneurs, the better the United States economy will be. So so today, still and then the other issue, it's not only gender inequality, but also wage inequality. Women make 70 cents less, 70 cents on the dollar than men makes. So if we could equal the amount of money in terms of wage disparity based on gender, it would be an incredible input into the American economy. So we're still underrepresented at every level of government, from the U.S. Congress to state legislatures to the U.S. Supreme Court, even though today we have 3 women out of 8 members of justices that sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. One of them is a minority, Sonia Sotomayor, Puerto Rican. But yet, when Nancy Pelosi became the Speaker of the House, that was a huge achievement. And she understood the meaning of her being the Speaker of the House, because she knew that she had the power to address the inequality that existed in terms of more women occupying positions of power. And so when you have a Congress that is based on seniority, and the same thing I think at the state level,
Yes.
that put us at a disadvantage, because you will have to wait 20, 30 years if you continue to be reelected to be able to wait your time in order to become the chairman of a committee or the ranking member of a committee. I was lucky because 5 years after I got elected into office, 3 members that were ahead of me either lost their election or ran for office, for higher office. I think were 3 or 5. And that really advanced my seniority in the Small Business Committee. And I got elected in 1992. 1996, I became the ranking member of the House Small Business Committee. Does it make a difference to be in a position of power? I want you to know, and I hope that you know, that the work in Congress is done at the committee level. That you draft legislation, that you drop the bill, that the bill is referred to the Committee of Jurisdiction, and it is the chairman of that committee together with the ranking member who will decide whether or not that legislation will be marked up in the committee. But you have so much power because you could decide, working with the Republican chairman, whether or not you work in a bipartisan way, what amendments will be allowed in order for you to to pass the legislation. And so, as the ranking, well, I was chair and then I am ranking because now the Republicans are in power. But let me just tell you this. When you look at the economic crisis that we faced in 2008, 2009, the economy contracted dramatically. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month. And so the economy was contracting. The only segment of our economy that was growing was federal spending. The money that the federal government spends when they need to buy airplanes for the Department of Defense, when they need to buy paper clips. So the federal government is the largest purchaser of goods and services around the world. And so when I saw that the federal government spent $500 million, and if you are a business person, you could contract, you could submit a bid and provide whatever you have, a product or a service. And so I realized that women were losing out. And so we set up contracting goals for small businesses because Raytheon, the big makers of planes, they were all grabbing all these huge contracts. And I said, and we said, how can we make sure that small businesses also have an opportunity to do business with the federal government? We set up 23% of all federal spending. But yet women, for small businesses, women went nowhere. So we set up a legislation that I passed. It was my legislation that will require for the federal government to provide 5% of their spending to women businesses. Next week in Washington, we passed the law in 2002. The administration of George W. Bush didn't implement the legislation. Of course, the big guys were opposing it. The U.S. Women Chamber of Commerce is that network that we need to know that is out there. How can you get something done? Well, you need to always have a network in place. When they didn't want to implement the program, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Women Chamber of Commerce, took George W. Bush to court. I provided 163 members of Congress signing into an amicus brief, and we went to the court and we won. The federal court ordered the president to do this. I am telling you all this because you need to know that we have to always look at ways to advance your agenda. And when we know that there are going to be forces out there that will try to torpedo whatever legislative initiative you put forward, you need to then go out of your ecosystem outside the Beltway in Washington and look for those special groups that will help you push that agenda forward. So how can I am giving you all these examples so that you realize the important role that women play, whether it's in the economy or whether it's in the government. But especially in politics, we need to have that women perspective. We need to, if we want a better America, it is fair that if we represent half of the population, if we represent half of the U.S. workforce, if we control so much of the purchasing power, trillions of dollars, then we must demand that we create an environment or that we create programs that will enable more women to participate. Last week, I was in an event and a young lady, Puerto Rican lady, who is working at Harvard, her bachelor's degree, she said to me, how can I get involved? And I said, start with the community board. Or at the political party levels, how you call it, it's not paying, it's not a paid job.
District leader.
Leaders, right? District leaders. And district leaders, they don't get paid, but they are so influential, or they could be so influential. Why? Because both political parties in this country needs to do better and more, to be more proactive by putting together programs that will help recruit more women. A lot of studies have been done that will measure women's attitudes toward politics and elected office. It shows that 46% of all men who have been elected to state legislature, they say that it was their own idea. It was their own decision. No one came to recruit them. In comparison, only 26% of women was their own idea. So what it shows is that gap that exists. That is why it's so important that at the political party level, that district leaders and other officials push for kind of program or initiatives that will enable more women to be recruited. When you have the House of Representatives, we are in the majority, Democrats, and the Republicans are in the majority. Each political party, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, they have a person, a member of Congress, who is in charge of a recruiting program that will go out and talk to people in the different states and will determine who is the best qualified candidate to run for a congressional seat. The problem that we have with that is that for the most part, the two from the Republican or Democratic Party, they're always men. And they go out and they reach out to their own network. And in most of the time, those networks do not have many women faces. So that cycle of recruiting more men to public office, to elected office, continue to be an issue for women. So we need to bring some equity, and we need to raise awareness of the responsibility of both political parties to encourage more women to run for office, and then to make it easier for women to participate in the legislative process. We need to change some of the rules and regulations that exist in the different legislative bodies, because it will be difficult for a woman who is a mother and a wife to be in a session until 2 or 3 in the morning. So that type of awareness needs to take place so that we change the rules of the game, and those conditions will allow for more women to consider to run for public office. And with that, I will answer any question that you may have.
So before we go to your questions, I hope you have a few. I have a few, all right? Mm-hmm. I became the Assemblywoman and my predecessor had passed away, a woman. The woman who succeeded me is a woman. And that's kind of unique in the 52nd Assembly District, with 3 members of the Assembly, all women. But like, who are your role models, female role models? Did you have any?
Yes, my teacher, my second grade teacher. I didn't have in my family. I was the first one to go to college. We were and I come from a very large family. We were 9 children, brothers and sisters. My father was a farm worker. And so a farm worker with an incredible sense of justice. And so he got involved in organizing the workers in the sugarcane fields in Puerto Rico. So I grew up watching him, and then he became very much involved in politics in my hometown. But it was my teacher second grade and then sixth grade that became my role models. I was just so afraid of speaking in public. I was so afraid of participating in the classroom, but they were able to detect that I knew, but that I was afraid of participating, and they just like took special care. They took time to talk to me and to challenge me to participate in. But there is always role models, and there is always along the way someone. In my case, they were always women.
Always women. All right, and one other question from me, and then we'll open it up, though I have more. How does the money and the fundraising impact positively and negatively for a woman candidate?
Well, it starts with the network. Networking is so important for us, and it's very difficult because if we graduate and we go to college, after we go to college, or we go and join the workforce and work, and if a person gets married, that she will come home to attend her responsibility, domestic responsibility, or you don't see that high percentage of women until just recently participating in corporate boards or law firms. So it is always that access to people with money that makes it really challenging, most difficult, of course, for women of color. It's just extremely difficult, and so that's a big challenge.
So there was a recent article in the New York Times which said about 30% of donors to political campaigns are women. All the rest are men. And we know anecdotally that very often a woman will write another woman a campaign check, but for a small amount. She often won't write a bigger one unless she confers with a man in her life, whether it's her partner, a husband, parent. They will go and ask first. It's almost as if that's a fallback to some old-time stuff where you had to ask for permission. And so we see that I raised money for 17 years, and I know that was true, and I know that it was harder for women to raise those dollars all the time, because sometimes you had to have a justification, and though we have better women's networks, I just recently got a solicitation from Emily's List, which is a national-wide organizing campaign to raise money for women. And we have one on the state level, Eleanor's List, named for Eleanor Roosevelt, who's the First Lady. And so they earmark funds, they raise from both men and women, but the funds go only to women candidates, which is a big help for women, but it doesn't make up that difference.
Yeah, and so yes, Emily's List, Poder PAC, Victory Fund, all those new PACs that didn't exist before, 20 years ago, their main purpose is to raise money to help more women elected into public office. Let me just say this. You have seen how divided our country is. Sometimes we make decisions not based on what is good for our country, but what is good for the political party. And when it comes to being more effective at producing legislation and passing legislation, women have a better record. And studies has been shown the amount of numbers of legislative pieces of legislation that have been able to move forward. And women have a better sensitivity and always at reaching out to the other side, working in a bipartisan way. When we were dealing with Planned Parenthood recently and the Domestic Violence Act, common sense legislation that expired, we know how many women in this country, or men, lose their lives because of domestic violence. So it was a common sense legislation, but some in Congress use it to play game with it because they wanted to include what we call poison pills. Doesn't have anything to do with the legislation that we have in front of us. but it is just to make a point that will energize their base, like abortion doesn't have anything to do with the Domestic Violence Act, for example, or anything that goes beyond the Affordable Care Act. Republican women, on a matter of principle, stood with Democratic women, and we stopped legislation from being moved. So it shows you that women, we care deeply about public policy, and much less in terms of ideology. We are the households, we have to take care of families, and in that sense, we are the ones that sit down and have to write checks to pay the rent. Even if you're married, for the most part, women tend to do that. So you become more aware of certain things that need to happen in order to, what we say is that there are some issues that are not women issues, that are American issues.
And then I have one more, and then we'll open it up. And I want to go back to Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign. There were people, when she ran for Senate in the state, made a concentrated decision that they were going to go out and buy her, I don't know whether it was 6 or 12 pantsuits. Now, doesn't that seem strange? 6 or 12 black pantsuits. And the reason is because women candidates often get described in the press, they get described in the media about what they wore, right? They don't do that for a man. They'll say the man had a red tie, the man had a polka dotted tie, he had a striped tie. So what the Hillary Clinton people did when she ran for Senate was go out and buy her the same, I think it was the same, black pantsuit. So that, and she may have worn a blouse or a t-shirt or a sweater underneath it, different jewelry, but the suit was the same. So they took away that whole piece in the press, in the media, about what she was wearing, whether the color was flattering or not. And if you see her now on TV, you see that's not the case. There's been a real flip, but when she ran for that time, the first time here in New York State, that was a big concern because the press did spend a lot of time talking about what females wore. So you want to, can you comment on that at all? And then we'll open it up to the class because I know we don't have much time left. You have, all right, we'll get to you in a minute.
5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes, yeah, I was watching my watch. Good,
Let's
thank
hear
you.
from the students.
Okay, but can you comment on what I said? Is that true?
How we, yes, it was.
Okay.
And, you know, the kind of clothes that we wear, or the designer, or it's just like nonsense. That doesn't define who you are. That doesn't define how capable you are. What should be important is your vision, your leadership, and the initiatives that you announce or that you discuss, and then for the public and the voters to make a decision if those programmatic issues or legislative initiatives make sense in order to deal with the issues that matter most for working families in this country.
Thank you.
So I went to Congress in 1993. We lost the majority in Congress a few years later, in 1994, 1996. And I remember I was walking down to the Capitol from my apartment, and a reporter from Newsday approached me and said, this is the day after the election, Congresswoman, how do you feel now that you are in the minority? Because Democrats lost control of the House. And I said, you're asking the wrong person. I've been in the minority all my life running Congress. Wow. So, but this is the deal. Yes, it used to be like that. But because the margin of victory for any piece of legislation that we pass in Washington is so small, right? Every vote counts. Every vote counts. Last November, we were dealing with the budget. And that was the first budget for the new speaker. Who is the new speaker in the House? Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan. So he needed to show the nation that he had what it takes to govern. And the first challenge was to make sure that the government remained open. And what happened? That the Tea Party members, that are like 60 in his side, in his Republican Party, they were annoyed with that budget, or the omnibus. That was a continuation of the previous budget without any increases to it. So when he didn't know if he had the numbers. They are like 250 Republicans. We need 218 to pass a bill, and we are 198 or something like that. Some other members who are open seats right now. He didn't know he had his own vote to pass the omnibus bill. So he needed to reach out to us in order for us to provide. Only 70 Republican members voted for that bill. The bill was passed by Democrats. And what I'm trying to say is this, that because the margin of victory could be so small, every vote is important, including this member, Puerto Rican member, minority member. And so things have changed in 23 years. And I remember when we passed the ban on assault weapons back in 1993, 94, and Bill Clinton wanted to pass that bill, and when we passed that bill, a lot of members lost their re-election because the NRA spent so much money campaigning against those members who supported that bill. The women in Congress, the 45 women who won elections in 1990, we played an incredible role in whipping members, in having meetings face-to-face with those members from Democratic conservative districts and explaining how important it was to pass that legislation. So I remember one conservative Democrat from Illinois, a very powerful member of Congress, very powerful. He was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And we were standing in every entrance to the House, every entrance, every door, all women, 3 women here, there, and we were just approaching with leaflets telling members why it was so important to pass that bill. And so when he came in and I approached him, he asked me, "Who are you?" And I say, "Who am I? Call Steven Solars and ask him, who am I?" Steven Solars. Steven Solars was the incumbent, 18-year incumbent with $4 million that I defeated in 1992. So I promise you, from that day, not only did he know, but he learned my name. Anyway, so to answer your question, I have invested a lot of my energy in educating members of Congress about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is part of this country. Exactly. There are 3.5 million American citizens. And so we are pushing and working on legislation that will provide the tools for Puerto Rico to be able to restructure its public debt. Mm-hmm. Yes. This is my closing remarks to you. Don't you ever, ever underestimate the power of one individual. Each one of you, you care about your school, you care about your community, your family. And too many things are happening, not only in this country, but around the world. And when we see our responsibility of being engaged electorally or otherwise, then we are allowing for others to make the decisions that will impact us as individuals and our collective. So please, always, always be engaged, participate, because America becomes a better nation when its citizens are involved. Thank you.